She's a queen, mother, sister, daughter, neighbor, lover. He's a king, father, brother, son of every stranger. We sing, sounds better when we get together. One thing we got to learn to do: take care of each other. Take care of each other. Take care of each other. Got to see each other in the mirror. Take care of each other. It's the one thing that matters.
Claudia Dey is a gifted author, playwright, and fashion designer currently based in Toronto, where she raises a family with her husband, the musician Don Kerr. That's Don's band Communism playing in the background as I'm speaking to you. Claudia's debut novel was 2004's critically acclaimed Stunt, which was a stunning and surreal story about a young girl in Toronto gathering clues to locate her father, who is up and vanished after leaving behind a cryptic farewell note. Dey has also written plays that have been produced internationally, including Trout Stanley, which is also propelled by a mysterious disappearance, unusual twin sisters, a newcomer to town, and characters with puzzling origins. Dey's long-standing fascination with the strangeness of people in family dynamics and humanity's relationship with erasure or vanishing has never resulted in as compelling a narrative as her latest novel, Heartbreaker, which is out now via Harper Collins. Heartbreaker tells the haunting story of a remote territory locked to the groove of all that is 1985, occupied by a group of people who once belonged to a cult and struggle to maintain some sense of normalcy while engaging in intertwining relationships that desperately confuse love with lust and family with friendship. The main character is Billie Jean Fontaine, who drops into the territory out of nowhere, mothers a child named Pony, and then disappears one day, 15 years later. The story of the search for Billie Jean is told vividly from the perspectives of her daughter Pony, her loyal dog Jenna Rollins, and an appropriately named young man named Supernatural. Ahead of her appearance at the 2018 Eden Mills Writers Festival, Claudia made time to discuss Heartbreaker with me, her interest in music and fashion design, how her own role as a mother and wife may have inspired her work, and much more. With in-kind support from Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, and of course listeners like you who make flexible monthly pledges at patreon.com/creative control, download episodes, and subscribe to this podcast. This is the 423rd episode of Creative Control, featuring Claudia Dey, with your host, me, Vish Khanna.
Take care of each other. Take care of each other. Try to see our future getting clearer. Take care of each other. We can do much better. Every soul has a hunger to be loving another.
Hi, Claudia. How's it going?
Hi, good, Vish. How are you?
I'm pretty well. Where in the world are you today?
Today I am in my writing studio in the West End of Toronto.
Very nice. You've been in Toronto, as far as I know, forever? How long have you been in Toronto? I can't remember.
I guess around 15 years, and before that I was in Montreal, and then before Montreal I was in Toronto. So this is where I was born and raised.
Okay. And it's fair to say the city of Toronto is always changing. I was thinking about this before we connected, and I was going to ask you about your perspective on Toronto as a city in flux, because it always seems to be under construction. It always seems to change a little bit. Do you notice that? Do you agree? I'm an outsider, right? So I kind of notice it more, but have you noticed that? Do you feel that?
I feel that. I do feel that. We went to Manhattan about a month ago and felt like it was easier to navigate than Toronto was. Toronto's become like, it's certainly thriving, but it's also at times tricky to go from one end to the other. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So you love it. You mean you've been there a long time. It's your home.
It's my home. It really is my home. Yeah, I have a lot of love for it. I have a lot of love for other places, though, too.
Oh, like Montreal?
Definitely Montreal. Yeah.
Well, it's I like Toronto just fine as well. And as you know, I'm a fan of you and your work. I believe in some capacity I have talked to you about all of your books, almost all of your books.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Vish.
Well,
that's so nice. You're like the only consistency in my whole life.
Well, I want to congratulate you on Heartbreaker, first of all, and because I enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you. Thanks so very much.
It's a dizzying book, and I thought for people who are listening who haven't yet dug in and are wondering about it, is it possible for you to get this going? Can you sort of summarize the story a little bit? Just tell us what it's about so that people can clue in.
Okay, so Heartbreaker begins with Billie Jean Fontaine bolting barefoot from her bungalow and vanishing into the cold October darkness. She's in a place called the Territory, which is basically the remains of a cult set in the far north. The year is 1985. And like a crime scene, those who are left behind end up kind of putting together her secrets and why she bolted in the first place. And so the book is in three voices. First, her daughter. Her daughter's called Pony. Pony's 15. She's like this kind of storm of a teenaged voice. And then Billie Jean's dog, and her dog's name is Jenna Rollins, and she's like this ancient lesbian killer dog with like a dancer's posture. And then the third part of the book is told by this kind of watchful, mysterious teenage boy in the Territory called Supernatural.
Right. Okay. That encapsulates the basic elements, but it is a wild story on some level. I think your prose is very fascinating. The way you've told the story, the way you've divided the story. I feel like it's a meditation on motherhood and marriage and the isolating aspects of both of those things. And then for some reason you've said it in 1985. Time is frozen in 1985 in this isolated place. This is where I'm coming from after reading this book. Let's talk about some of these things. First of all, why 1985? Why did that year resonate with you as a place to freeze these people in time?
I think there are a few different reasons behind that, which I can only kind of see now that I have some distance from the book. One is just the aesthetics of 1985. It's the most unsettled time. And so as like a visual person, I'm incredibly drawn to all the tropes of that time, like the leopard print and the electric blue eyeshadow and the crimped hair and the big gold hoop earrings. And then also the music of that time, Nazareth and Air Supply, Prince. And then I think on a deeper level, well, technically it would be very hard to write the story of a woman vanishing with the technology that we have now. Phones have made our lives so unmysterious, and it's like impossible to disappear with GPSs and everything else that's on hand. So I think that was the other big aspect, was like revisiting a time inside humanity that was like much more peopled and much less robotic.
Okay, that's fair. Does that time resonate with you personally? Was 1985 a big year for you?
Well, I guess I was 13 in 1985. So, I was in like the bodysuit and the high-waisted jeans, like going to a ravine at night and meeting up with my friends and like leaning into a mirror and, trying new things with my face. And that whole thing of like puberty is such an extreme time of transition. And I'm so drawn to those extreme times. Adolescence is like the feeling of excitement. You're in this like constant conversation with yourself, and every night could be the night that changes your life. So I think that that's why I wanted to return essentially to the feeling of that year and that time.
Is there anything about that time that you view as sort of silly in retrospect? You mentioned some of the fashion. You mentioned some of the music. There was a sort of 80s revival a few years ago where people seemed to be adopting some of those aesthetics, both culturally, musically, whatever. And, there still is. There's this show Stranger Things, and there's other sort of throwbacks to the 80s. Like, do you view it as kind of a kitschy period? Do you view it as a kind of embarrassing period that needs to be explored?
I guess for me, I'm always drawn to the place that's like really just beside parody, So it's like Wes Anderson or like Almodovar or like professional wrestling. Like, I love a big expression because there's a vulnerability in that. So yes, I see how like the big hair of the power balladeers, the power balladeers and their deep cuts, like Love Hurts. I see how that's kind of funny, but to me, I actually find it like emotional, and I'm not a cool person. Like, one thing that I really resist in art is like a feeling of cleverness or coldness. I like to feel things. I like to be moved. I like to be changed, and I think fiction can change a person.
Yeah.
So I see the silliness, but for me, it's like not that.
Well, speaking of warmth and being moved and change, I mean, I alluded to the fact that I see motherhood and marriage and relationships and also how sexuality intertwines with all those things. Those are all in this book. There's like a wild lustfulness, I think, within this territory and a real sort of emphasis on childbirth and affairs and things like that. And I mean, I know you're a mother. I know you're married. I know you have some perspective on some of these things, but can you talk about this particular exploration of those themes? And if I'm off the mark, by the way, call me out, Claudia. Don't be afraid. That's what my reading of this is. And you mentioned the cult, which the cult thing that's a big thing now. People being brainwashed in plain sight. It used to be these isolated communities. I feel like in this internet world that you alluded to as well, we are all, I feel like zombies a little bit. We're all brainwashed a little bit. Anyway, I don't mean to conflate too many things at once, but let's talk about the mother marriage relationship stuff and the sex stuff, because I think that's really fascinating and a key point of the book.
Yeah, I mean, the central character is Billie Jean Fontaine, and she's named after the Michael Jackson song. And part of why I wanted to write her is because I feel like women who do bad things are underrepresented in books. And I'm really drawn to women characters who contain multitudes and contradictions. She lies, she cheats, she steals, she begs. She does a lot of things that are criminal and immoral. She's also like a totally devoted mother and a totally devoted wife. So how does that all exist inside a single person? Yeah. That was a huge idea for me, was that we can be more than one person inside a lifetime. And I guess for myself, certainly these huge shifts in my own life, when I got married, when I became a mother, I could feel like the tectonic plates of who I had been shifting, So you contain like former selves, even my teenage self, my 1985 self was in there as well.
Yeah.
And so that I was really drawn to in the book. And I think the other thing about Billie, and this touches on your question around cults, is just the wolf versus the wolf pack. She's a completely independent thinker. She scripts her own life in a really dangerous kind of unrelenting way. And she doesn't follow the conventions of this world. And as you said, the world that I've made actually feels really close to the world that we're living in now, in the sense that it's, like based on a fragile economy, that there are rules around marriage and sex and birth and, the identical trucks and the identical bungalows, like the conformity of the place, and how if you stray from that, you're just so suspect.
Yeah, yeah. So there's something going on. You feel like this is, while it takes place in 1985, ostensibly, I don't want to give too much away, of course, but while it takes place in 1985, you feel like this is a real commentary on what's happening, not just for you, but maybe for us in general.
I do. People have asked me if the world is a dystopia, if I consider it that way. And I really don't. I really consider it to be like a 2,000-mile drive away, that it just happens to be out of view. It happens to be outside of the news cycle, but it's happening. As you said, people are getting brainwashed everywhere now in plain sight.
Yeah. Do you think there are communities like this? Was this drawn from any research you'd done about some sort of contemporary version of this beyond? I'm speaking generally about modern times and brainwashing and the way people interact with the news and information and the outside world. This is a very isolated place. They get there. The internet is like a delivery guy or someone sort of...
Exactly.
Yeah, so
exactly. That's brilliant. I love that.
I find that fascinating because I the more we learn about parts of America right now and parts of Canada right now, the more we realize that what we generally view as reality is not other people's reality. And I don't know if you were trying to create a kind of empathetic atmosphere for this book. There are people who just think a certain way and that's it. There's nothing you can do about it. They're just trapped in their mindsets. Do you feel like you're making a comment on that?
Well, I definitely, when I was doing my research, I read a lot about the FLDS, the Church of Latter-day Saints in the U.S., and was so struck by mothers putting their 13-year-old daughters in wedding dresses and loading them into a van and driving them across a border to a roadside motel to be married off to an elderly leader. I was so haunted by that complicity. Who are you? What remains of you when you forfeit your moral authority? So that was definitely a preoccupation, and that's ongoing for me. And you can see even just visually how that entered the book with the big hair designs and the pastel prairie dresses and all of that. But then on a personal note, I realized that, I spent 8 summers in lumber camps, tree planting and then cooking. And when everyone was in the camp, it was very kind of wild, wild country, and we were a couple of hours from the nearest town, and this was pre-internet, we're driving unmarked logging roads and setting up camps. So we're really apart from the culture and from the economy and from our lives, and a lot of that experience, I think, entered the book, even in small symbolic ways like duct tape and big dogs and big trucks and the wish for ease and comfort and love, But it also, when the planters would leave for the day and I was alone and I didn't have a walkie-talkie and I didn't have a truck, I had that feeling of I could just disappear. And I'm so far away from everything.
Was there something appealing about that? I think as a parent myself, I've come to value, and someone as a married parent, I think I value my time on my own a little bit more than I ever had to. Do you have that? Do you feel that?
Oh, yeah, of course, completely. We have no idea how much freedom we have before we become parents. And then you become a parent and it's like the death of miscellany. It's all of that time in your head dreaming is replaced by this kind of dutiful list that's actually really important.
Right.
So yeah, I think, one thing that's kind of beautiful is as your children get a little bit older, they end up having a concurrent wish for autonomy, I think.
Right.
Just as you want to close a door and be on their own, they feel exactly the same way.
And that's reflected, I think, in the rebelliousness of Pony on some level in this book. And that is a very interesting character. I want to ask about this division as a sort of structural choice, this notion of dividing the story from 3 perspectives, and maybe why you thought that was an effective way of telling this same story, because it's really one incident that drives the book. And obviously the perspective of a dog is a bit unusual, and the dog's name is Jenna Rollins, which is also fascinating. An actress, maybe a little bit like Billie Jean. And I should say Billie Jean I forgot about this notion that Billie Jean is named after this Michael Jackson song about paternity and where a who a child's mother might or father and mother might actually be, which is a recurring theme in the book as well. Anyway, can you talk about the structural choice of dividing this narrative these three ways?
Well, it came to me really, like I'm not one of those writers who maps out books. Like I really work kind of intuitively. And that came to me really early, girl, dog, boy, and structuring the story that way. I think I'm, because of my dark mind, very drawn to the idea of like a police report, like a crime is committed and then you have a group of eyewitnesses, and depending on their perspective and their relationship to the victim, or whoever kind of occupies the center of the crime, then you end up solving it, but they'll all have a different lens and they'll all have a different view and a different investment in what's happening. And I felt like Pony is like a slice of wildness, she's 15, she's got a lot of secrets, she has a lot of anger, she's coping with the betrayal that she feels. Her mom has abandoned her, and her mom has essentially been shut in for like 3 months before she bolted from the house. And then Jenna, the dog, is sort of aristocratic. She has this like stateliness. Yeah. She's kind of erudite and polite, and she has a huge amount of the backstory because she's like a witness. She's a guard and a confessional and all of those things.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Soups is kind of most inside the world, like the real world. He's got like deep geekiness and like a digital watch, and he's like tracking the scene and the search operation. And, so in a way it's like the book moves from the internal to the external.
Right, right.
Given the progression of the voices. And so it could only really conclude with Soups in his section. Right.
Okay. I mean, I'm hoping that all of this drives people who are listening right now to pick up this book because I really enjoy it. And I mentioned that your prose is particularly striking and distinctive and poetic. And I thought at this point I would just ask you a little bit about your writing background. As I mentioned earlier, I'm familiar with, I think most, I feel like did I miss a book? How many books are you at right now, Claudia?
Well, I wrote 3 plays and then 1 novel, 1 how-to book about sex, and then this novel. I guess this is number 6.
Number 6. I'm vaguely in the sex book, aren't I?
Yeah, you're actually the star of the sex book. Yeah, the whole centerfold thing. Yeah.
You named a character in your sex book after me, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Did I?
I think so. I don't know. There's a Vish in there, and you told me to keep an eye out for it, and I was like, what?
Wow. Okay. Then I did.
Yeah, you did.
Congratulations. I should.
You don't remember this? My goodness.
No, it's a terrible thing. Like, you complete a project, you complete a book, and then you actually really exit it. And it's a great and beautiful thing, because then it actually just belongs to other people.
Right.
It's been your secret for so long, and your toil, and I mean that like in the most loving way. It's a total compulsion. But then you finish it, and it's like, okay, now it's yours. And I go into like a fugue state. Basically.
Right. It's also the plight of the cultural creator to spend potentially years on something like this and then have it go into the world and be not I assume you want as many people as possible to experience this book, but at the same time that you're not going to reach everyone, and that's got to be a little weird, to think that you spent all this time into something and it might just disappear into obscurity.
Yeah, I try not to think about that too much.
Right. That's fair.
Because then I'll end up like face down on the carpet. But I definitely, when I was working on this book, I thought so much about my reader, like it felt like such a private, intimate thing, and the voices too, because of my backgrounds as a playwright. The 3 voices of the book I would picture as like rooms, like a theater, and you walk in, the lights come up, you're with Pony, the lights go down, you walk into the next room and there's Jenna, and then their soups. So I don't know. I guess I thought about my readership so much with this book, particularly, I have to say. So of course the hope is that it reaches people, and the way books reach people are, it's such a strange world that we live in now with the great persuasive presence of the internet, but it's actually just human to human. It's people saying, "Hey, I read this book. I love this book. You should read this book."
Yeah, and yeah, I agree. Yeah. I agree. And speaking of the reader, where I was going with the praise for your prose is a little bit of background. I just wonder if you can sort of enlighten us. Where did you find your voice? How did you begin writing? What drew you to writing is I guess my question, first of all.
Well, I think I was making books when I was little, like when I was like 5. I was writing books. The first book that I wrote was about 2 flowers going to a flower hospital, and I stapled it. It was like some kind of punk zine. And that's still basically my aesthetic, So that's been forever. I've always been writing. I've always been like an incredibly hungry reader. Books to me are sentient, and like they're just the most profound company. They always have been. Like that was my soundtrack as a child, was just whatever book was in my head. And then I formalized it. I went to McGill. I studied English literature. I wrote a play in high school, another play in high school. And then I wrote a play at McGill. And then I went to the National Theatre School, and I started to concentrate my reading and really started to discover some of my heroes and, big moments. The biggest one was the first one, I guess, seeing the play adaptation for Michael Ondaatje's The Collected Works of Billy the Kid. Mm-hmm. And it was such a wild, complete thing. It had so much vitality and then so much rigor, like so much craft. It was so like cared for, but it was still so like dangerous. And I just thought, that's what I want to do,
Right. Okay.
Because you can Photoshop work, right? You can Photoshop fiction. You can wreck it by like overcorrecting it, Mm-hmm. And you can also pay attention to commerce and then lose your voice, so all of those things have guided me. And then I really love funny. I think funny is really important. I really love to laugh. And so I look at prose stylists like Joy Williams or Laurie Moore or Samantha Hunt, Chekhov, even Sam Shepard, who I know is mostly dark, but there's some funniness that underpins the pain that I'm really drawn to.
Well, the other thing that I thought was curious about your description of what's going on in the book and in terms of it being set in 1985 is you really struck upon the fashion. And I know you're interested in fashion. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're a fashion designer?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So you got into writing and you explained that. How do you get into fashion per se?
I mean, really, I've always had a love for dressing. It's always been a really creative act for me. I grew up with my mom and my sister just essentially playing dress up and then leaving the house and whatever confections we came up with. So it was always a huge part of how I expressed myself. And then between books, my closest friend and I, we both just had babies. So we were like probably wildly underslept and like full of romance, decided to start this design studio called Horses Atelier. So that was about 6 years ago now.
Okay.
And then it really became, a business very quickly. And it's a huge joy, and it's very different from writing. It's hugely visual and technical and administrative, and writing can be those things as well, but they complement each other. They're like 2 worlds, 2 places that I get to live, and I visit one and then I visit the other and go between them.
So fashion, from my perspective, is either it can be practical, it can be an art project. Where does in terms of your work as a fashion designer, are you making things that one person would wear down a runway and then that would be kind of it? Or are you making things that people can actually wear all the time?
Wow.
Is that a weird question? Is that an ignorant?
No, I totally love that. I love that so much, Vish. I would say it's actually just like practical art. So it's practical in the sense that we only make what we most want to wear. And we make clothes for women whose days are very dynamic. But we make things here in Toronto. So there's obviously a lot of politics in that, we live by our values. And we work with like mills in Europe mostly to source our fabrics. So it's very fine, but very classic and timeless.
Okay.
I would say. And maybe that sounded like Muhammad Ali. I don't mean to at all, but I'm trying to give you a view of what it looks like. And I guess the two categories are slip dresses and jumpsuits. We make a lot of workwear.
Okay.
So a lot of, yeah.
Well, I have a theory. Tell me if I'm curious if you would agree with me, but I have a theory that musicians in particular drive fashion, drive the way we kind of behave aesthetically more than movie stars. I feel like movie stars copy musicians as well and kind of look a little bit like musicians. And I know that it's striking to me that in setting the book in 1985, most of the cultural references are musical or fashion oriented. And so that's why I wonder if you might be aligned with this notion that, because I believe you love music as well, and your life is immersed in some music, right?
Definitely. Well, I married a musician, and so we have a recording studio just 4 floors beneath where I'm sitting right now.
Right.
But I love that idea so much, and that makes so much sense to me, and I haven't thought about that like sequence of influence that way ever, and I think that's totally brilliant and super true. It's like, it all starts with like Blondie or David Bowie or, Benjamin Clementine. Like you can see this sway that they hold in terms of how we then want to look when we exit our houses.
Yeah, I think there's something there, and I don't exactly know what it is about musicians that would drive such things, but it seems to be true. It's something I've noticed a lot.
I think you should maybe copyright that idea.
Okay. Well, I've set it out to the world now, so who knows what's going to happen. What could I do with that idea? I don't know what to do. Is that a book idea? Is that an article? I got to do something with it. You're right. I think there's something going on. Yeah. Okay. I'll start pitching it around. So speaking of next projects, what's coming up next for you? I know you'll be touring, so to speak, behind Heartbreaker. You'll be traveling around to writers festivals and things like that. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and amazing bookstores, and I'll be in conversation with some of my favorite brains, so that should be really fun. That's mostly September and October. And then I have another novel brewing in my head, but I can't talk about it. It's sort of like opening the door to the dark room. I have to keep it very secret.
Sure. But it's heartening to know that you've already got it, because it's been since Stunt came out in what year was it? 2000?
Yeah, that's right. It's been a decade. It's like a space phenomenon. It's been, so it makes sense in a way for me in terms of my own internal logic that I have like a stack of ideas. Yeah.
Okay. So it's the fact that you're already moving on to another novel idea is excellent. Okay, so where can people learn more about Heartbreaker? Where can people learn more about you if they wish on the internet or wherever you'd like to send them, Claudia?
That's so nice. Well, I guess I have a website, which is, I don't know if that's the equivalent of having a MySpace, but I have a website, and it's just my name, which is Claudia Dey. And then I do a lot on Instagram, which is Claudia Daytona. And I visit Twitter every once in a while. But mostly I will be in these various bookstores and writers' festivals, and I much prefer like human-to-human contact whenever possible. So if you like to go to those things, come on over and say hello. Okay,
and people can learn more about those appearances at, is it claudiaday.com?
You got it.
ClaudiaDey.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this was really, really fascinating for me, Claudia. I appreciate this this time, and I wish you the best of luck with everything going forward.
Oh, thank you so much, Vish, and thank you for such a close and thoughtful read of the novel. I appreciate it so much.
Special thanks again to the folks at Harper Collins and my friend Don Kerr and my other friend, Claudia Dey. The last person, Claudia, was just on the 423rd episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available on all iOS and Android platforms and also on things like Spotify, YouTube, and Audio Boom. If you can't find an episode that you're looking for on any of those platforms, or if you wish to learn more about me and sign up for my regularly scheduled newsletter, please visit my website, vishkhanna.com. You can like Creative Control on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at VishCreative, or follow me at vishkhanna. You can also listen to a radio show version of Creative Control on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time around the world at CFRU.ca or on an actual radio at 93.3 FM if you're in or near Guelph. Visit patreon.com/Creative Control to make a flexible monthly donation and keep this podcast going. Thank you to everyone who pledges to our Patreon. Please consider pledging at patreon.com/Creative Control. Thanks again to the in-kind support I received for this program from businesses and people who work at those businesses. Businesses like Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, Planet Bean Coffee, and Grandad's Donuts. I'd also like to thank my pal Jim Guthrie. He lets me use the instrumental version of his song The Rest Is Yet to Come to end this show each week. Go to jimguthrie.org to learn more about Jim. And finally, thanks to you for listening to this show and subscribing to the podcast on whatever platform you use and downloading episodes and just telling your friends about it. I think that's the way the show is going to make its way into the world, by people saying, have you checked out this show? The show's not bad. It's pretty good. You should subscribe to it and listen to it so we can talk about what we heard together. That would be cool. So thanks to you, those among you who are already doing that, and I encourage the rest of you to do it as well. I have to go. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.